Hi everyone, my name is Sandra, and I was born and raised in Maryland, a peaceful state with long stretches and tree-lined streets. Living there, I spent most of my time with my mother, a lady of elegance who never stopped smiling at me from the early hours of the morning. As my mother was making breakfast till dark in the beloved small kitchen, my father, a quiet guy, was always conscientious and responsible for his work. Everything was fine in my recollection, or so I believed, but when I was 15, my world fell apart, and my mother passed away from a sudden and short illness so fast that I didn't realize what had occurred as it happened. The feeling of nothingness grew stronger. I saw my father succumb to loneliness in a previously abundant residence with persistence in life and laughter. We were no longer the family we once were. Each morning I attended school, and the night I returned home, nothing had changed. The kitchen prepares the same uncomplicated foods, although my mother was no longer present at every dinner. It was just the two of us, but the distance between my father and me gradually grew larger than the size of the house, and when I turned 18, my father's remarriage was a surprise to me, even though I knew he deserved to be content once more with his new wife. My stepmother was a benevolent and compassionate woman. She gave birth alongside her son, Lucy, who was only 1 year old at the time. It felt strange that they were younger than me. It felt as if my life had reversed and deteriorated again. My circumstances had drastically altered, and I felt a sense of peace. It was recognized, however, that at the age of 15, my world abruptly disintegrated. My mother was deceased following a brief and abrupt disease that progressed so rapidly that I did not even understand the circumstances, and the sensation of emptiness intensified as I observed my father's transformation. We found ourselves alone in a once abundant and laughter-filled house, but by the time morning arrived and I went to school, we had transformed into a different family. My return home that night, everything remained unchanged. The kitchen still prepared the same simple meals, but my mother was no longer present. Every dinner consisted of merely two individuals still. The distance between my father and me gradually grew. At first, I consistently felt uncomfortable in the house. He was making an effort to fit in with this new younger demographic. Even though he had no prior experience that could cause discomfort, he remained silent, perhaps mirroring my state of acclimating to the unfamiliar. The evening situation is comprehensive. The family would assemble in the living room. Father and stepmother conversed below regarding work or plans. Timothy and I exchanged glances with a subtle bewilderment that compelled me to quickly disappear. My family's dinners were always the same, gradually becoming a chance for us to get more intimate, but oddly Timothy often bought food for me, a small gesture that made a small difference in my experience. Usually he was always quiet and avoided talking, letting I'll talk most of the time, but occasionally he gave me a longer, more focused look than normal. I wondered if I was being overly sensitive or just a younger brother's feelings for his younger brother, but it was undeniable that as time passed and the presence remained, the tension between us was that neither of us talked about the feelings that should have been just sisterly. But when did it become more than that? I struggled to pinpoint specific moments throughout the day when my heart started pounding. Despite my hatred for Timothy, I wouldn't say I like the feeling of my heart racing close to him. His gentle footsteps reverberated down the corridor, and I began to perceive him as more than just a nocturnal companion. Timothy crept into my room. Typically we would engage in a succinct dialogue before he went back to his room, though he sat for a longer time than usual, his eyes fixed on me intently as if he wanted to explain an unexpected situation that left me speechless. I perceived the ambience between us oddly. The oppressive silence persisted. I felt perplexed, and before my contemplation inclined my head slightly, beckoning him to remain for a brief period longer. We sat in the darkness in the muted illumination, surrounded by two strangers who, for some reason, found Timothy irresistible. My brother possessed a certain handsomeness that I was unable to overlook. At times I pondered whether I ought to experience emotions, feeling terrible about it since Timothy was my brother by designation. Ultimately, excluding those thoughts was frequently ephemeral and disregarded by more rational justifications, such as proximity, residing in the same domicile, or the concord of two young individuals residing in terminated sleep in different spaces, albeit in proximity. Rooms were on the second floor. In contrast, my father and stepmother slept on the first floor, which occasionally led to Timothy and me encountering unpleasant situations at crucial moments. I was a first-year college student while he was a senior in high school, fully engaged and prepared for important examinations while we were trying to adjust to our new routine. Unquestionably, there was tension between us. On certain after-school evenings, we would relax on the couch in front of the TV, casting a gentle glow throughout the living area. Despite this, we both remained silent and unsure. Not only did a sense of normalcy acknowledge my feelings for Lucien, but I was also unsure of how to express them. These feelings were real and went beyond the bounds of familial affection. Despite the calm evening, my heart raced every time I saw Lucien. When we accidentally crossed paths on the staircase, there was a mysterious quality in his eyes that I couldn't ignore. It was a calm evening, but I suspected it wouldn't end the way my parents had with a 5-day journey away from Lucien. At first, I was alone at home, and we expected it to be a break under adult supervision. That evening, we gathered in the living room, and neither of us found the idea of starting a romantic movie particularly interesting, so I prepared some dried squid. The film initiation was rather simple, because I had a few cans of beer and a tiny amount of fruit after a busy week. We were seated, we were deep in our usual conversation. However, a brief conversation and gentle laughter pierced the silence of the residence later. The film presented an unexpected scene of a couple fervently embracing one another for unknown reasons to which we both succumbed. Laughter had ceased. The unconcerned dialogue between Timothy and me abruptly grew congested. It ceased to be the solace of two sisters sharing uncomplicatedly the instant I sensed Lucien's gaze upon me longer than the customary glance, and an intense sensation began to disseminate throughout my body, yet I remained silent, merely seated while holding a beer can in my hand as a means of retention, composed before I comprehended what Lucien had embraced me. The movements were vigorous and unforeseen, enticing his kisses, which were intense, unleashing all the long-suppressed emotions. I was unable to resist. My heart was tumultuous, but my body responded in a different way. We had transcended the limits. That moment of fraternal affection, instantaneous in the darkness and silence of the room that night, was no longer ordinary. The night marked a critical turning point, a metamorphosis that I understood would never repeat the events of that evening. No constraints could refute the fact that I had experienced a profound break. I gave in to my emotions, allowing what shouldn't have happened throughout the entire night. Timothy and I bonded, surpassing all boundaries, and we didn't engage in extensive conversation about everything. Emotions overshadowed our repressed need for PR-driven closeness, which we attempted to maintain, but it seemed to come naturally. We couldn't remember the control. I lay next to Timothy in the room that was all mine, the quiet sleeping spot, clearly looking forward to the following day as the soft sunshine filtered through the curtains. My surroundings were the same as they were every other day. Even though the light was inviting and the room was quiet, something had entirely shifted within. We looked at each other barely once and generally kept quiet. At this stage of our lives, we may have both comprehended it and will not repeat it in the future. We continued to relish that time because my father and stepmother were still a long way away. Even though it was over, the discomfort paradoxically lingers in a condition of ease, as though we were a couple free from prying eyes. People who were in love stopped being considered family to others. Dinners become private times between Lucien and myself. Every night we got together, watched movies, spoke, and ended the evening in the same bed. In those days, I allowed myself to ignore reality and the fact that Lucien and I were only siblings in the name we used at the time, as if we were a young, free couple with no worries about the events that were happening so quickly that I couldn't even describe how overwhelmed I felt by our secret love and long nights. Finally, the time came for my parents to return. When they arrived, the routine of the home was restored. Timothy and I were put back in our jobs, but we acted like sisters. Nothing happened under one roof, as if the intimate experience were fleeting. In my dream, my parents spoke and smiled as they traveled, and they were unaware of what they were doing. Timothy and I sat there, looking at one another quietly, certain that our secret had to stay forever. We saw each other carry on our secret connection in confidence throughout the course of the following few months. The lengthy, restless evenings and covert encounters were the norm. Timothy would either depart early or sneak into my chamber whenever my parents went to bed. Throughout the day, we would embrace each other as if there had never been any barriers between us. We made an effort to keep things normal in the US. Family dinners continued as usual, and my parents didn't know Timothy and I had just made eye contact. This covert stress left me gasping for air. Although I was unable to breathe, I was able to do so simultaneously. Although the remorse was gradually wearing me down, it wasn't powerful enough to force me. Despite the covert activities that took place every night, I gave up my attempts and kept on living. I thought I would not be able to get away from Lucien since every time with him got so familiar. I came to the conclusion that this connection was intolerable. I started using birth control, giving contraceptive pills in a careful and discreet manner without anybody else knowing. Despite my fear of the consequences of this connection, I chose to take control. I tried to convince myself that it was still possible. We wouldn't have been here. Almost a year later, Timothy graduated and proceeded to college. He left his home and moved to a different city to continue his education after Lucien's graduation. Despite my reluctance to acknowledge that the barrier between us created difficulty, I anticipated that our connection would alter no more clandestine evenings and no more tranquil moments together. The separation compelled us to place that friendship on hold, although I still feel burdened by nostalgia. After my graduation, I resolved to seek a novel trajectory for my life. I submitted an application for employment as an office employee in a digital environment. The position at the corporation was unremarkable, however, it provided me with stability apart from the days of turmoil and emotional distress in the midst of the chaos. I met him, the man who forever changed my life. He owns a sizable, expansive hair salon in the city and is a charismatic individual. During the initial meeting, his power and tenderness struck me. He was unlike anyone I had encountered before, and every gaze he directed towards me instilled a sense of safety in me, an experience I had never had before. Over the years, we have developed a profound love. Almost immediately everything unfolded naturally, as if fate had brought us together soon after our marriage, and we began to build the family life I had always dreamed of, having a kid together. The complete days spent with him and the child are significant. I momentarily forget the agonizing memories of the past. Occasionally they resurface to torment me during moments of vulnerability. I realized I had discovered a new sanctuary of individuals deserving of affection and esteem. However, in the recesses of my mind, the recollection of Lucien in those clandestine days had not entirely vanished. I contemplated whether I would ever genuinely forget everything. Still, I had a family to protect, and that was the most important thing. However, a deep part of me still harbored shame about my husband, despite the fact that he was an exceptional individual who consistently showed genuine affection and concern. Every time I looked into his eyes, I felt a weight on my heart, as if I were hiding a part of my past that he should own. I am uncertain whether I should disclose this information to him regarding my history with Lucien. My contemplation sometimes prevents me from sleeping, leaving me torn between divulging all information or maintaining this confidentiality. I occasionally worry that you may no longer view me in the same light. If I reveal the truth once more, all that we have constructed, the small family value, could disintegrate due to an admission. Nevertheless, continuing to keep the secret is like a rock crushing down on me. Every day it makes me feel inadequate. I'm not sure what the appropriate course is, but I deserve the love he has for me. I'm stuck at a fork in the road, not knowing which way to go. You may judge me for hurting a lot of people because of my previous sins after hearing my narrative, but I can only ask, what would you do? Would you tell the truth even if it would cause trouble, or would you keep quiet? Choose to say nothing and let the past seep deeply into your memory, hoping it will never come back to haunt those you know. I look forward to your advice, dear. If you were in my shoes, how would you respond in the comments section below? I either keep this information private to safeguard my belongings, confess everything, or suffer the repercussions. I welcome any guidance, empathy, or feedback, as I find myself at a critical juncture, uncertain about my course of action.